getting no video. So there we go. We're ready to record, and we're going to start taking a look at some additional lettering things. And I want to make sure we get to small letters because small letters are their own problem. Most of you should be on our newsletter. So if you're not, let me know. But if you're in the webinar, generally you're on our newsletter because we've got some news coming for you in probably about 3 to 4 weeks, maybe a little bit sooner, which, is kind of good news. And, you might want to pay attention to your newsletters. All right, we're going to go ahead and start with some lettering. And I don't know if I covered this or not, so we're going to go ahead and look at this. I'm just going to type in, my name for right now. And I think we covered art font a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick little art font. Art font is these nice little text path shapes. This isn't technically enveloping. A lot of software call it, software systems will call it enveloping. It's not really enveloping. What it is kind of a reshape on a text path. So when I pick an art font shape, and you can see there's several of them in here, I have some options. So I'm going to go ahead and say downward sunken for right now and say OK. And just insert the letters, and let's go ahead and generate these. So what I have is it reshapes my letters to the shape that I've selected. Now these little yellow diamonds are going to let me, reshape a little differently. I have different options here. I can make this smaller. That's kind of my kerning right there. And, I can pull this into a bigger arc. And let me kind of redo that. I still have my spacing nodes, so you can see, because when I squish those all up, they got a little funny. So I can come over here and just click on these spacing nodes and move these as well. And when they overlap like that, sometimes you're better off just going to edit and try reinserting those. And if that doesn't work, just press delete. And let's try that again. Okay, so this is going to let me, control the amount of arc on this. Each one of these little diamonds does something different. So, here is just a plain square, right? There's my little arc downward. And you can see it kind of just reshapes the word. Go ahead and put stitches in so you can see it. There's the reshape. Now, you might want to play with some of these shapes and just get comfortable with them because there's a lot of different options that you have. And, one of these is, I always refer to this as the megaphone, because it is kind of megaphone-ish. If you have, cheerleading, or if you do some things for cheerleading, if you want to make it a little more, depending on the size of the name, you just use your black boxes after you generate. You can make that larger or smaller. And just remember to regenerate. So just real quick, those are some of your, art font shapes. Okay, now these are like a text path. It reshapes it automatically. Okay, it's going to keep it on whatever path you assign it, but these are pre-assigned paths. And you can see there's kind of a 3D effect to some of them. And they're kind of neat, but that is a text path, okay? Now, some of the other things, I'm just going to kind of take art font off now and insert my name just on a regular old text path, right? Some of the other things we have are, getting back to text paths. This is a text path. It's just a straight line. If I need to place this lettering on a straight line, but maybe at an angle, then I just come in here and you can see where it says text path current line. I can click on this and say line. And then I can say, I want my lettering to go from here to here. And I still have all of the controls. I can still kern the whole line. So I still have all of those options, right? And I can still scale, with the little white arrows and flip it if I want to, right? I can do all of those things, but that is just a text path. There are lots of text paths. There's the current line, there's an arc, there's an ellipse, there's a freehand, right? Now, if you want to do circular lettering, you're better off creating 2 arcs, because let me show you what happens. If I say I want to create an arc, I place a left click, drag the line, place another left click, and then make my arc. And it's better off to go to the middle. If I try to control that arc at the sides, it's a little harder. If I go to the middle, I have a lot more control. And then I just place a left click and I'm on this arc. Okay, so if I said, let's put this on an ellipse, it's going to take it around the circle in an ellipse like that. So if I have, for example, 2 lines, and I say on an ellipse, they're going to be 2 ellipses, but they're going to be placed different. I'm just going to go back to the line for a minute and go ahead and generate. Now, when we do 2 lines of lettering, each line is editable. So if you have something you have to do circular, you're better off doing your first line on an arc, and that bottom arc section, or that bottom of the circle, in a second line. And then you can come in here and say, okay, let's arc this one upwards. And there's your left click and the second left click and then your arc, right? And then let's come down here and let's arc this one downwards. Okay, now when you're arcing up and down. What you need to look at is this. This is with my letters on, the above the line option. And that works very well for an upward arc. When I'm arcing downward, I should go below the line or centered, and here's why. If I just leave it above the line, like this top arc, what's going to happen is these letters are going to jam together. So I'll show you what happens if I just leave it on a regular old arc and I arc downward. Okay, this is, here's my arc. They're above the line. You can see how they're kind of jammed together there. Well, if I say, you know what, let's go ahead and put those below the line. See how they're jammed together right now when they're above the line? If I put them below the line and say okay, you can see they space out. And here's kind of my, a good guideline. If you're not sure, use the centered on the line. You can see the spacing changes automatically. Look at the spacing there with it centered to above, right? To below. You can see the spacing is different for each option. Pick the option that's best for the shape that you need. Sometimes centered is good. Generally for an arc, below the line is good. But center is okay too. You've got that spacing pretty decent. All right, so does that make sense to you guys on like the basic text pass? I don't want to cover this a lot because I know we've done this in our previous webinar, but I just wanted to kind of cover that because I think we have a couple of new people in as well. So let me know if you have any questions on above the line, below the line, or the basic text pass and that art font. Remember, art font is just a fancy text path. It's not technically enveloping. I'll show you enveloping in about 2 seconds here. Okay, so you guys are good. All right, so these are text paths. Okay. Line, arc, ellipse, freehand, existing outline. We haven't covered that too much, but we'll kind of cover that down the road. But those are text paths. Art font is a series of predetermined shapes which are also text paths. Okay? That's a text path. Your lettering is fit to a shape and path. Okay? So, let me change this back to a line. When I change, I have to draw the line. So I'm going to draw the line from here to here. And drawing the line is just a left click and a left click, and there you go. I've got that drawn, and we'll space that out a little bit. Okay, text path and art font, it's just a fancy path. Enveloping is a little bit different. Enveloping means I can reshape something pretty much any way I want. So for enveloping, I could use, the text path and then envelope, or I can just envelope something that's on a line. To envelope, I'm going to, if you guys follow my mouse, if you guys see my mouse moving right here, you come all the way down to your align toolbar, and there's this little double, arrow with a funny shape, in between. That is a reshape or envelope tool. What that allows me to do is to pick a basic kind of starter shape, and, twist this around. So we'll start with this one. As soon as I click that, it applies the shape. And I've got these little black nodes all the way around this. Every black node is a potential option to reshape. You can see when I mouse over, I get the four-way arrow, and I can reshape. And then just regenerate your stitches. So I can really reshape that even more than I can with Art Font. What I can also do with the reshape is I can reshape a reshape. With Art Font, I can't change this. It's what I've got. But I can reshape a reshape and change based on what's already there. And you can see every time I've got one of these little black nodes, I can really, adjust this, right? But I don't have to just move them linear. I can move it like this too. So we're going to kind of really reshape this. You can see I can really twist the letters or envelope them around. And it'll regenerate. It might not be overly readable sometimes, but you can fine tune and maybe adjust, like lettering that needs to arc in a certain way and splay out. You know how some lettering gets wider as it arcs? You can do that with this tool. You can also take this, and I'm just going to kind of grab like a basic shape, and you can really twist your letters around. You can see I'm kind of overlapping my shapes. And it's going to tell me you're going to cross your outlines. And I'm going to say, yeah, go ahead and do it. And you can see that's kind of a jumbled mess. I can generate that, and that'll actually stitch. But that is enveloping. Now, when enveloping comes in handy is, when I need to maybe, we were talking about arcing a shape. Let's see if I can do this real quick. I generally have to have kind of something to go by. But if I say, let's pick this, and I need to, arc this downward, but my letters tend to kind of, splay out a little bit. Then I can actually reshape this to get that effect. So it gives me a lot more options than just, my enveloping tools. So let me go ahead and hit enter. And there we go. So I can really reshape, I can fine tune that and keep fine tuning it to get what I want. And it's going to regenerate so that, the stitches aren't overlapped, even on this twisted mess down here. All right, so I wanted to kind of cover that real quick. I think we covered that previously as well, but, a little refresher on that. Some days when I'm really frustrated with things, I find that this is even better than doodling, because I can come in here and be passive aggressive in a way and really torture lettering. So just bear that in mind. On one of your frustrating days, you can actually come in and kind of torture lettering around. All right, let me go ahead and make a new file, and I'm just going to insert my name again, and we'll leave it on a regular path. Now, even if I do apply Art Font, or as a matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and kind of grab an Art Font thing real quick. So if I apply like the wave here, I have another lettering option, and that is I can create automatically shaded letters or shapes or anything else I put into the program. Generally, it's used for letters, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to have to select these like I'm going to edit. So I come up to, my little blue color chip. If you follow my mouse up here, if I want to click on this blue color chip to select everything that blue color chip represents at one time, I can do that. And then I'm going to go up to my accessories. In my accessories, I have this option to create shadows. And I can do this with lettering or anything else in the program. But what's nice about this is I can create a shadowed effect. And, my width is at 2, my direction's at, 315 degrees basically. But here's kind of like my quick little drag. What direction do you need those shadows to be in, right? So we'll kind of put our shadow like that. This is my shadow color, so let's go ahead and change that to something a little happier. This is my width. If I really want wider, a wider shadow. I might say, 3 or 4.0. Let's go for 4. And that's my reverse compensation. Well, that means that's the compensation going underneath the original letter. And if I want, this is a little bit bigger, I might change this up to, 0.2 or 0.3. That's how much overlap's going to be underneath this top color. Once I say OK and generate, you can see there is my shadow, right? See my original letter and my shadow, and I placed that pretty far away. I said 4, right? But what's neat about this is it automatically puts that shadow color in the first stitching position above the letters that I did, and you can see they're all little pieces, right? So I'm going to click on this blue color chip right now, and I'm just going to delete that so you can kind of see how it carves them out. And, so you can see it doesn't double stitch, right? When I have this lettering on top of that, those pieces are not going to double stitch. So it makes kind of a nice little shadow. Now I'm going to get rid of this shadow. And we'll go ahead and select everything. And the other way to select everything is right click, hold your right mouse button down and drag around it. You can select that way as well. Or you can click on the color chip up here. There's several different ways to select for editing. What you want to make sure is that you're flashing, which means you can apply different things. So let's go up to accessories, create our shadows, and we'll go back to a happier pink, right? It's going to end up kind of burgundy, but this width setting isn't so much the width of this. It's not going to be any wider than your letters. It's kind of like a drop shadow for those of you who've worked in Photoshop. Like if I say 1.0, it puts it a little bit closer. See? So it makes a nice, neat little quick shadow that you can, automatically have color sorted, and you can see it's not doubled up. So that's your, automatic shadows. And like I said, it's, it was intended for lettering, but I can do that with anything in the program. So if I want to shadow this right here, I can say, you know what, let's go up to accessories and let's create a shadow. And I can create the shadow here as well. So just bear that in mind. So let's go ahead and get rid of these for right now. And I'm going to stop before I go on to small lettering and see if you guys have any questions on what we've done, or any comments, because we're going to start working on small lettering, because small lettering is its own little animal. Any questions? You guys are all good? I'm not sure if you guys have your hands up. If you could locate your question box, that makes it a little bit easier. Like the hand thing, I can kind of say, okay, you've got your hand up, but there should be a question box on your screen if you have a question. All right, let's start looking at small letters, because small letters are really their own little animal. I mean, that's just the best way to describe it. To get good small letters that are lowercase, that's an editing issue. For the most part, if you have all capital letters and your lettering is 7 millimeters, that's pretty small. You should probably bold that just to give it a little more beef on each side. So I'm going to go ahead and make the small letters and say go. And don't pay attention to your 3D view. Look at this in your regular view. Okay, now I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to try to find a font that's going to do something like, jam the top of these letters together a little bit. Let me see if I can find one on here. That one might do it. Okay, I've got it bolded still, right? And I'm going to leave it bolded and just say, okay, let's go ahead and generate. Okay, now I'm a little jammed up here. Even if I go into 3D, You know, I'm kind of jammed in these sections, and there's some little issues even on these sections that, you know, are a little bit different. Like I'm going to want a space, but you can see, you know, that's, you know, everywhere I move, I kind of jam a little bit because of those little pieces on the side. See the pieces on the side? So, you know, if you're using a font like this, you're going to want to maybe space. But when it's really small, the chances of you jamming up are pretty good, like especially in these areas. You can see like, you know, the F and, you know, the I is not that big of a deal, but, you know, the F has these little pieces coming over. You know, the I, as it's jammed between these two pieces, have some things coming over, right? So, you know, you've got some things to look at. You also have a setting that's going to make this small lettering even better. So let's go back into edit. And if you look, you have this option that says small lettering stitch. Okay, I bolded this and I'm going to tell you why in a second, but that small lettering stitch is going to be important. It's going to give you better settings, and see how much crisper that lettering is. Let me go back and kind of undo. See my lettering now? When I apply that small lettering stitch, see how much more crisp that is? I still might have some spacing issues, but you know, I can resolve those with my kerning nodes. But that small lettering stitch is going to give your lettering automatic settings that's going to make it look a little bit better and behave a little bit better. Well, let me restart here. And get back in there. Oh, I wanted to make that all caps. Hold on. All right, so let me get back to where we were. That's a good one to use. Okay, that's on 7.5. So remember, small lettering stitch. When you get down to 7.5 or lower, that small lettering stitch option makes a big difference. So let me go ahead and generate here. All right, so even at 5, you know, I'm still going to have to space these out, right? And I might have to do some editing, but at least it's a little more defined. Don't pay attention to your 3D view. I'm at 5 millimeters on these letters. These are very small. Here is what you have to worry about when you get to lettering this size. Okay, first, you know, the small lettering option is going to help you. Second, you're going to have to probably space these out. And you're probably going to have to edit some things, like you need to get some space between this I and this T, or you're going to lose some definition. But the other thing on small letters that you really have to watch is that these columns need to be 1 millimeter wide. They should not be any smaller than that. You will not get any definition if they are. So we kind of zoom in, and you're thinking, well, okay, how do you find out if they're 1 millimeter? Well, go up to your ruler and measure. From here to here, I'm good. I'm at 1.22. But here to here, I'm not. These are too small. Now I can do a couple of things. I can select everything, and I can go into my settings, and I can go over to my satin tab, and you know, I'm going to change my density to maybe let's go to 0.38. Now, let me take that back to 0.42. Sorry, that's a small lettering density. It takes the density down. I can go into my pull compensation. It's at 2.7. You know, I might want to bump that up. Like, I need some beef on these letters. So if I bump it up, something's going to happen. I'm going to have a little more beef, but it might jam my letters a little bit too. But I'm going to change that small lettering setting to 0.6 on my compensation. You can see I got instant beef everywhere, right? And, you know, let me kind of zoom out to the one-to-one view. And you can see the letters, but at 5 millimeters, you just got some editing to do, and that's just as simple as it gets. Now, when this was at 7.5 millimeters, I didn't have as many problems. So anything below 5, small lettering is just fine at 7.5, but anything below that, and I'm going to have to start looking at what I need to do. Now I'm back at 7.5, so let's zoom in down here. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to measure. We're going to make sure that these are at least 1 millimeter, and they're not. So, even depending on the font, even at 7.5, I've got to check that these lines here are 1 millimeter, or I'm not going to have much definition on these letters. So what if you have a customer who insists on very small lettering like this, and you know that you don't have enough on these smaller satin areas to stitch well? Well, you've got a couple of options. You can, as I said, come in here and select this, go into your settings, bump your pull compensation up. Maybe 0.27 is too low, but maybe 0.4 is good. And that's going to increase your column width. So let's kind of zoom in around here and get our ruler out again, and let's measure. We need to get to where we're 1 millimeter. We're really close there. We're getting closer. These are fine. It's these more narrow areas. Well, what if you keep bumping up the compensation, all of a sudden your letters are all jammed together and it's just not going to work? Then you've got to look at another solution. And this is truly what you'll do with most of your small letters. Okay, if you can't get something with a 1 millimeter width, no matter what you do, or increasing that compensation just makes these jam together too much, then you've got to look at another option. So I'm looking at the T. I'm going to go into my ruler, and I'm going to start measuring here. I'm just below 1 millimeter. I really need to be at 1 millimeter. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the T for right now. That's the only letter I have, and I'm going to kind of zoom just the T, and let me kind of zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to go into my editing tools. So I'm going to come up to my View Outline tool, and you can see how narrow that is. You can see how narrow that is there, right? All the way across, you can see why you're having problems, right? So these areas that are too narrow, you have a couple of choices. If they really have to be this narrow, then you're going to have to look at editing the stitch direction on these narrow areas. But in most cases, your best result's going to be to edit the shape and get this to be a better or wider shape. Okay, so we're going to look at that option first, editing the shape of the letter. To do that, I select the letter, like I said. Let's go back here. Right-click on the letter you want to edit. Go into View Outline, and I get this shaded letter indicating that that's what's selected for editing. If you notice, when I go into View Outline, I have this new outline option. See where my mouse is? There's the outline menu. All of the tools for outline editing are on this menu. I can also right-click on the shaded cell and get the same menu. What we're going to do is we're going to look at our reshape options, and here's one that's called Adjust with New Points. And what Adjust with New Points does is allow me to quickly move these areas around so that I'm not doing node by node, right? So Adjust with New Points works like this. I want to edit from here, this section right here, okay? And maybe make that a little bit wider there as well. So we're going to say we're going to start our editing there. And I just place a left click on the outline. See where that green node is? And I want to end my editing about here. Now, when I mouse over, the line that I'm going to edit turns blue. And if I place a third left click when that line is like really bright blue here, I get the outline attached to my mouse. And what I can do is come down here and place my left click to make that shape, and then make this a little bit wider, I'm reshaping the area. So I place another left click to finish that point. And then I'm just going to use what's currently there to widen this just a little bit. When I'm done, I press enter. See how that quickly widens that area, right? The other option is to use the node editing, which means, I'd be in here like pulling node by node. I'd be going like this and, trying to adjust this and make it all even, right? I might have to do a little editing, like I was a little off right there, so I'll pull that a little bit. But, for the most part, I'm not doing node by node. Node by node editing is not always the most accurate way to go, okay? So that's why it was quicker on this side, even though I might have to edit a little bit. I might have to pull a node or two over that I've messed up on. It was faster to do it with the editing tools. And even if I'm in this view, I can still get to that editing tool. I can still right-click on the area or go to the outline menu at the top up here and get to adjust with new points. So I can say, you know what, I really want to adjust from here again over to here. And if I make a mistake, just backspace or press escape and start over. So let's say let's adjust with new points. We want to start from here to here, and this is the line I want to do. So, again, I'm just going to stretch that over a little bit, trace the outline. I'm right-clicking to make those curves, right? I'm just widening this up just a little bit so I get a better stitch result. And when you come up here, just place a left click and press enter. And, there's my new shape, right? Like I said, I might have to edit a little bit. Touching that up is not that big of a deal. One node is not a big deal, right? You can delete a point as well if you want, if they're in the way. But for the most part, it's just a quick little fix. Now, when I generate, I can take my little ruler now and measure from here to here. And I've got enough. I've got enough beef on that letter, on that post right there, that it's going to stitch properly. Even if I go out to 1-to-1, you can see I'm getting a better look here than I have on, the F's or on this E. I've got enough thread there to make that work. Now, in some cases, you may not be able to do that. So let's look at another option. This E, the same problem with this E and this section of the R as I had with, that crossbar on the T. So I may want to look at another option if I can't reshape this. If that's not an option here, what I can do is right-click on the E, and I can come up to my view angle. And what I need to do is give this enough thread to make it stitch, right? And that I'm not going to be able to move. But see these lines here? Let me kind of zoom in around them. I can adjust these angles. Like right now they're at 90 degrees pretty much, but there's going to be enough thread here, but this might be pretty narrow. So if I just angle these, right? Angle these down, and even taking this like to a point, right? Like this, I'm going to get that stitching angle in here. This angle's good. I would probably get enough, but I might want to angle a little bit more. This one I need to angle. And, I need to angle in here as well. So let's right-click and say add a stitch direction guideline. And what I can do is add these guidelines. And what's going to happen is this. I've got this stretched out so that my stitches are going to be at that slight angle, right? And this one I'll probably adjust. So let's go ahead and generate. And what I've done is change the stitch direction now. Is it going to really show up when you're sewing? Not so much, but let's take our ruler and let's measure from here to here. And you can see I've got enough stitch length now. I'm over 1 millimeter, but I'm able to keep the actual width of that letter. So let's zoom out 1-on-1. And even though it looks as narrow as, the originals, right? What I've got is that thread length has been lengthened because I've changed the angles to this direction, so going straight up and down. Let me kind of zoom in on that again. So I'm going to get a much better result. I just have to make sure that I have 1 millimeter of thread in here. And see, this is not going to stitch as well because even though it looks better right now, it's too narrow. So remember, you right click on your letter to select it, go into view outline, or I'm sorry, view angle, and, just move these angles. And in this case, because you've got that natural corner, I might kind of do something like this. Take that angle and keep that angle intact. And remember, you can right click and add a stitch direction guideline to make sure that that angle is going all the way across here. And hold on, it's just not going to let me make those easily sometimes, but so that that angle's going all the way across and you get enough length in here. And then just generate and measure and make sure that you have enough length. And if not, then you might want to look at angling that, but I've got enough length here too. This I'm a little more severe on than I probably should be, but I wanted to make sure you understood kind of making those angles. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to increase the thread length, because that's what it has to be, at minimum of 1 millimeter to get good lettering or satin stitching. You can reshape, like I showed you. You can change those angles. Okay, and that is on big, it's not big lettering, it's, capital lettering. So before I go on to like small letters, do you guys have any questions? No questions on the letters at all? Okay, so is the angle like stretching? I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions. Moving those stitch direction or block guidelines in view angle, does that make sense why you do it that way? Oh, you guys are way too quiet. Okay, thank you, Jackie, because it's all about stitch length. So, try that. I did the top one a little more severe than necessary just to see that, but try it, practice, and do some test stitches until you're comfortable with what angle works for you. Now, those are capital letters. There are some other things that you can do when you have lowercase letters. So let's take a look at lowercase letters, because lowercase letters at this small size are a little bit different. And I'm trying to see if I can find, I'm going to just kind of put some letters into that generally cause some issues. Okay, well, I've got an I in there and I've got a T, so that's good. All right, so let's go ahead and generate. And right now this all looks good until I've got the small lettering stitch selected as well, if you notice, because, it was already checked. So the small lettering stitch is checked, right? But when I go to stitch this, it may look really, really good on the screen, but those E's are going to be closed up, period. That G, I'm not even sure that that line's really going to stitch well. It probably will just from the looks of this, but it's not going to really look like a G, right? I mean, there's just one line there. It's going to look like a C, okay? And then this C is probably fine, but every once in a while you get one of those lettering sets that the C kind of closes up on you, or you get small enough that things close up. But these E's, I can tell you right now, are going to cause an issue. And that's because this opening is so small. Now you already know you're going to have to edit either the angles or the size here. And let me go in and edit and make sure. You can try bolding this as well. Don't forget, bold sometimes is one of the best options you can pick, even if you might have to space your letters out. Let me go ahead and delete this, because if I make it bold to start with, then it generally spaces well. Let me go back to 101. Okay, so I bolded that because it does give me a little more beef on my letters, especially for small letters. I need that little extra width. But my E's are still going to be a nightmare. I still need to space these out. So, you can left click on one of those kerning nodes and then hold your control key and left click on multiple kerning nodes to move those letters apart. Okay, and these aren't looking too bad, but my T is a little funky, and I might want to move these apart just a little bit, right? They were overlapping because I, bolded it, but the T is kind of small. Yeah, it's kind of the font, but if it's not really what you want, you might want to edit that T a little bit. So we're going to start looking at how to handle these small letters. I'm just going to space these out so we have a little more definition in our letters, because you get to a certain point and sometimes you just have to give it some space so you can actually read what the letters are. Okay, so now we've got a little bit of space. We're doing a little bit better here. But let's start looking at what we can do to make these letters look better. Right now I'm okay on this, and the I is going to be fine, but those E's are just a mess. So let's kind of zoom in here and take a look at this. So I'm going to select the E, I right click on it, and I'm going to go into View Outline. And you can see, the shape is funny, but I can fix that. And the quickest way to fix this E is really going to be to right click and say adjust with new points. And I want to adjust from here. And sometimes that goes, when I'm zoomed in this far, jumps up a little bit. Don't panic. And, I want to go to here. And this is what I'm going to edit. So what I'm going to do is, try to follow this outline, but I'm going to bring this down. And, come over to here. And, I brought that down significantly, right? And I might right click to fit into that outline and just press enter. So I brought that down. Now, I've got this little bobble here, so let's just go ahead and click on this section. And, we can adjust that section too. Hold on. For some reason, it's too small, I think. If you can't get it because it's such a small area, just go in there and delete one of those points to smooth that. Because this is going to, the satin stitching is going to look better based on how it's adjusted. Okay, so now I've kind of got this E elongated in here and smoothed out, but I've got this mess in the middle here. So I'm going to right click and go back to adjust with new points. And I'm going to say, we're going to adjust from here. We'll start with this section here, and we'll do this line first. So we're going to bring that down a little bit. We're going to straighten up. I got to go back. Sorry, I got to start over here because I picked that line. So we're going to left click here and straighten this out a little bit. There's that adjustment. Okay, I want to adjust from here all the way to here this time. And, I'm going to have to do some note editing, but what I want to do is I'm going to, bring this out and open this up. And like I said, if you make a mistake, backspace. But I want to open up that hole. And I'm going to press escape. And like I said, I might edit a little bit. So I'm going to delete a couple of these points over here. And I'm going to pull this node up so it's a little more even. And I might even delete it, like all of these points in here. Because really all I need is that arc. I don't even need this point. The fewer points I have, the better off I am. But I'm making that wider. And, same thing down here. I might delete some of these points out of here. The fewer points I have, the easier it's going to be to edit the segment I need. So I'm going to make that a little bit longer down here. I've opened up this E here. And I'm going to start using the node editing to just pull this up a little bit. And yes, it's going to go above the other letters, but anything that has a curve to it is also going to pull a little bit more. So if I make this adjustment so that that's a little taller, this is a little bit more open, then I'm not going to really notice that this curve is an issue. Now down here, I'm just going to delete these points. Real simple. I'm going to make this wider just by deleting these points and taking this arc and just arcing it up. And, I can adjust this as well, right? If I want this to be a little more open and readable, since I've lowered that, I may need to bring that down a little bit and, just clean up a little bit down here. The same thing with the bottom arc. If I need to, I can adjust that out a little bit, because anything with an arc up or down is, going to pull a little bit more to the point where you're not going to notice the small change in height. All right, so now let's just make sure our points are lining up pretty good, because that's going to determine how well the satin forms. And let's go ahead and put stitches in it. Now I'm not going to leave this here because my blocks are a mess. I'm going to come down. If you follow my mouse down here, I'm going to say complex, back to satin, and oops, sorry, sometimes when the webinar is going, it just doesn't want to behave. So let's see what we got here. Let me go back into that E. All right, I'm going to just edit it real quick so we can kind of get back on track. So like I said, adjust with new points, and then I'm going to bring that down and just reshape it. And I'll kind of make this a little more extreme, but okay, there's my initial reshape. And I'm still in the tools, so, now I'm going to come in here and, I truly could probably just go into node editing at this point, except I've got some really odd things going on here. See how it says I'm going to cross my outline? I want to say no. So, sometimes when you have these odd things going on here, you're better off to delete and then try to adjust if you're going to do node editing. Okay, but still, it's a little bit harder. It's easier to say adjust with new points and say, you know what, from here to here, I'm going to adjust this line. Because then I have the option of saying, okay, I want to right click for a curve, a left click for straight, and I can even come over all the way over here at this point if I want. And then just say, okay, from here to here, let's adjust this. Oh, sorry. And you have to go back to the node where you started at. So if you don't, you're going to get a crossed outline. But you can see I can adjust it that way as well, right? So let's go ahead and straighten that out real quick. All right, so that's a little bit better. Don't worry about fine tuning, with the nodes. And if you need to delete these points, what you want to do is watch that your corner points are lining up pretty good so your satin forms correctly, and that you have a bigger hole here. And, last time we kind of just deleted these points down here and just, adjusted. If I right click on the outline and drag it, then that tends to curve it. And I'm going to straighten that out a little bit so there's not quite as much of a sharp curve going on there. All right, so let me adjust that arc a little bit, and let's go ahead and generate this time. And I went from satin to complex, and what that does is reset my blocks. And let's go ahead and generate it, and then let's go back to satin. And what this has done is reset my blocks so that I have this pretty decent looking satin stitch. Okay, so when you edit your letters, if sometimes you end up with them turning kind of odd, or you get that odd little place that just doesn't want to adjust, then you can go from satin to complex and then back. Now I'm going to go back here and I'm going to delete this. And remember, we talked about, just briefly here, we talked about increasing the height on this arc up here. And that is going to let that stitch, it's going to give me a little more thread in here too, right? And the same thing here, I might want to kind of delete this out and bring this down a little bit. If you have a letter where you're doing this with it, then this is going to close up. So let's go ahead and generate, and let's go out to 3D and 1-to-1. Okay, if I'm looking at this, you know, this looks kind of a mess, right? This looks kind of like a C, but that's kind of a mess now. And the reason is if you have a letter, wow, hold on, my mouse is just not very responsive in the webinar sometimes. If you have a letter like this, you know, I've made this big giant adjustment, right? But, you know, this is a little bit arced and this isn't open now. Then, you know, I'm going to have to kind of go back and say, well, you know, maybe I need to make this a little thinner and pull this up. But I still want that opening. What I want is really that opening to be more open. So I've kind of deformed the letter, right? But if you're closing up in here, like that almost looks like a O with a line through it somewhat, right? Then, you know, I might want to make some changes. Let me go ahead and add a stitch direction guideline. See if that makes a difference on that one look. I might want to make some changes down here. This is going to stitch much better than what it actually looks like. You're going to see the opening. The opening's bigger than here, right? But I might want to come into View Outline Editing, right-click and say, divide it with the line, and just really chop off this part. The reason is if I chop off this part, then what I have is something that's a little more open and readable. So if I've opened up this hole, and I probably would open this up even more, I've got to deal with that little hook right here coming up and closing up. So now this at least looks like an E and not an O with a line through it, correct? So it's all about opening up the holes and taking this arc and, you know, increasing that. So I can still do that. I can still pull this arc up if I need to, because that small letter on that curve is not going to be notable. You know, so if you need to make this hole bigger, you've got arc up here to work with. You don't want to be ridiculous, but even at this amount, that is such a small lettering set that it's not going to show, it's not going to show as a ridiculous amount of arc. Then that gives me room here. I'm going to delete a bunch of these points because really all I need is just one point in the center there to be able to open that up a little bit more. Okay, so if I need to use that arcing space up on top on curved small letters, let me go out to 1-to-1. It's not going to be noticeable when you stitch it on that height. But you can see I can, you know, open that up a little bit more, and I actually can get the E to have an opening in it. And what I did was chop off the tail down here. Now, on some letters like the C's and the S's, these are pretty good, but there's going to be some fonts that this closes completely up and this closes completely up. And the way you're going to handle that is going to be to go to your view outline. You're going to right click and you're going to say divide it with a line, and you're going to cut pieces off. And this S is a little, or this C is a little different, but we'll go ahead and chop it a little bit anyway. You're going to cut off these pieces. You're going to deform your letters because ultimately these little pieces may cause those openings to close. So you can get a little more definition and a little more opening in here. So that's kind of the basics of what you're going to do with small letters. Now I talked about this G, and you're going to find letters that, like this G, you know, it's like a line. This is a little bit better. You can see there's a few more lines here, but you know, that's not going to stitch all that well, and it certainly wouldn't show up on some garments. So let's go into our view outline, and on this it's real simple. You're just going to make this taller. And you can make this shorter if you need to. So let's go out to 101. And let's put stitches into this. So now I'll get a little more stitching there, and I still didn't close this completely up. So I'm going to go ahead and stop for a second and see if you have any questions. Norma's asking a good questions, like if I reshape that E that I did and I have another E like I do right here, you know, do I have to really edit both letters? The answer is no, actually. I would just copy and paste that in. I'm kind of a work smarter, not harder kind of girl. So if I have spent a lot of time on editing this font and I know that at some point I'll have other customers that want this font, there's a couple of things that I can do. To save time, I would do exactly that. I would right click on the letter so it's flashing. Then I would just copy, paste, use your arrow key on your keyboard, and you can see the outline moving so you know that that is lined up properly. And you're just going to move it right over on top of that E. Okay, now when you paste a letter, it goes down to the bottom. And a lot of times what I will do is I'll take that new letter and change the color so I know where it is and where it needs to go. Okay, so here's the name. I know that I replaced the C. So in my film strip, I'm going to left click on the E, hold the control key, and press delete. Now here's the N and there's the I, right? So I need to place the E before the G, which is in cell 7. So just come down here, right click, and say move to 7. So now it's in the right stitching order, right? And just remove the color stop by clicking on the rainbow and hit go to regenerate. Now, even better, if I know that I've done a whole lot of editing on this certain alphabet, maybe I didn't get all the letters, but maybe I've gotten the O's, the A's, the E's, and whatever letters were giving me problems, then I would take it a step further. Follow my mouse down. If you don't have this building block bar open, see my building block bar? Just go up to View, Toolbars, and there's a building block bar. Okay, make sure a check mark's there. That's going to open this up. So if you come over to this building block bar and you right click, you get a little menu. Go to add a page and give it a name that you'll remember what it's for, right? Maybe a certain font. Maybe you have this specific font that your customer uses and unfortunately they want these little names on their thing. Or a lot of things are small lettering, or you might use this for another customer. So you make this folder and see it shows up now. And what I can do is I can right click on this E and I can copy it, make a new file, paste that E in, and remember to put stitches in it. So there's my little E. Now I can save this E so I never have to edit this letter again. Go up to Accessories and Building Block. Then you're going to save the building block, and there's my small letters. So you can put E, dash LC so you know it's lowercase, and this is what's going to happen. Okay, if I click off to another folder and come back, the next time I need that E, I just select it. There it is. I don't have to re-edit it. It's just done, and I can keep it in the program for use down the road. So to go back to the question that was asked, do you have to edit everything? No, you can just copy and paste whatever. Oh, I don't need that one. Whatever you want. So save it in your building blocks, and then you'll be able to pull that up anytime that you want. So there's my small letters. There's my E. And what's nice is I'm going to put a whole bunch of these E's in just, to show you what you can do with the building blocks. There's a whole bunch of my E's, right? So if they're building blocks, they're technically not letters, but I can left click and drag around anything I put in there. I can come down to the aligning tools and align them by their bottoms and then space them out. And I can come into the super align tool and I can say, okay, above the line, centered on the line, below the line, and I can put these on a path. So if I say, let's put them on a path from here to here, There's my path. It behaves like lettering. I can space, by pulling on that, I can squish them closer together. There's my kerning nodes. And I can put these letters back on a text path. Now, I may run into a little bit of a problem with G's or J's, but those are easy enough to just adjust if you need to. So that's what you can do besides just copy and pasting. You can make sure you never have to edit those again. Louise is asking what I clicked on to cut pieces off. Okay, what I clicked on, and Norma's asking about, I'll answer Norma's question, then I'm going to answer Louise's. Okay, Norma's asking about what changing sizes from one customer to another. Okay, if you have a customer that wants these a little bit bigger, then you can adjust this and just regenerate. So if you have edited a font, or you make that perfect, I wouldn't make it quite that small because you can't see anything, but, or you've made that perfect trademark symbol or registration mark, or you've made little letters like this that stitch well, then you can adjust them and regenerate the stitches to any size. Okay, now to get back to the other question, what I was clicking on, I'm just going to make a circle real quick, was the editing tool. When I need to edit something in the program, there's two things that we kind of looked at. We looked at view angles. Now, view angles is only for satin stitching. Okay, it's going to allow me to change the direction and maybe do some editing to some letters in a specific way, but it's specifically for satin stitching. It won't let me reshape the outline of something. It just lets me change stitch directions. Okay. If I wanted to cut like the pieces of these off, what I did was I right clicked on what I wanted to edit. And you can do multiple things. I could hold my control key and right click on, multiple things. So I have 3 or 4 selected, but sometimes it's good to start with just one. Then I went up to view outline. There's my view outline. It takes me into that crosshatch shading. When I go into outline, I have a new menu that says outline, and I can select from the tools here. And what I used was divide with a line. I can also access this menu by right-clicking on the shaded section, and there's my divide with a line. So what I did was I just divided with a line. I left-click and place my first point. It's got to be outside of the area, and I come across to what I want to slice, and I place a second left-click, and I press Enter. And what I've got are 2 pieces. Right, here's the first piece, there's the second piece. Then I just right-click on the pieces I want to get rid of, hold my control key, and press delete, and they're gone. So did, that make a little more sense? It's an editing tool, and we're going to start covering a little more on the editing. The next webinar, we're going to do a logo, but at some point, we're going to start playing with circles and tools, or circles and squares and shapes, just to practice the editing so we get comfortable with what the tools do. So, all right, does that make sense a little bit on the small lettering? The basics are you have to have a minimum of 1 millimeter on that column or satin stitch to get that lettering to look right. The other thing is on small letters, you're going to have to deform them. The worst ones are going to be D and A and B and P. And, O's aren't generally too bad unless you get very small. But anything that has a little hole in it like this tends to end up looking like a dot at a certain size. You can stitch 5 millimeter lettering, but it's very, very small. And it's good to stay at a point where you don't go below 7.5 millimeters whenever possible. Sometimes I know on logos your customers want everything in there, and you may have to at some point ask them about thinking about that, because not everything, there's a certain size limit where things just aren't going to stitch properly. So do you guys have any questions on what we've done so far? Jackie's asking if you should change your needle size or thread for small letters. It kind of depends on what your machine is. If you're running more home-ish type of machines, right? And maybe the SWF, except kind of changing your needles out on the commercial machines is, not something that you generally look forward to. But if you're on a home machine, it's real easy to change that needle out and go to a smaller needle. That will help. But, the bigger help is if you can get 60 weight thread. Now, there is a 60 weight rayon thread that, is going to, you're going to have to adjust your tension. So it's going to kind of be a, how much work do you want to put into making small letters? If you use rayon, the tension settings on your machine are way different than what polyester is. So there is a 60 weight polyester thread. It's a little bit hard to find. If you guys are used to dealing with Cookie, you could probably ask her to maybe hunt that down for you. But a 60 weight thread's going to give you some better results because it's just a smaller thread. The smaller needle will give you better results as well because there's less recovery of the weave of the fabric. So a smaller needle will help as well, but you're going to probably have more needle breaks if you're running at high speed. And, if you're doing a lot of small lettering, then you might want to take a look at maybe setting up a needle or two on your machine, depending on how many colors you're going to do on that 60 weight thread and the smaller letterings with the smaller needle, so you don't have to change them out all the time. But a smaller needle and 60 weight thread, it's going to make a difference. It kind of comes down to a production thing, though. How much time do you have to change that out, or can you dedicate a couple of needles on your machine for those names at a 60 weight thread? But that'll definitely help. Debbie's talking about changing the size of the stitch width. We did change that by bolding those letters. We increased that width to give us a little more beef. But, if you only have 4 inches to fit a name in, sometimes, you're really stretching that 4 inches is all the way to 4 inches. So widening that stitch width doesn't help necessarily. I mean, if you're losing some definition, you could increase your compensation, but when you get down to really small letters, the more compensation you add there, the more stitch width you add, you're going to close up those small holes on your letters more. So, at that point, it's kind of, you're working against yourself at that point, if that makes sense. If you increase the width of your letters, Deb, and then you try to make the letters smaller, I know what you're thinking, but you would just end up closing up all the holes, like even on your B's and your R's on the capital letters. So, small lettering is, a little bit different. There's, you can't kind of do it. Logically it would seem like you could increase that width, but the problem is the holes on those small letters, they just close up so easy. So Norma's asking how you get to the recorded webinars. In your newsletter that I sent over to you, there were links to the past webinars. And what you're going to get, because you're in the webinar or register for the webinars, you're going to get a link in about a day or two. I think the system automatically sends out a note to you. And once I have that video done, I'll upload it so you guys can get to it. And then I'll send out a newsletter with the date of the next webinar. And that's going to have the links in it as well, so you can get to the past webinars and to this webinar. So, all right, you guys have any more questions? You're welcome, Norma. Any more questions on the letters? I know this kind of probably seems a little foreign, but really until you just get in there and do it and stitch out a couple things, see how they go. If you want to invest in some 60 weight thread, if most of your colors are white or black or red maybe on the names, then, that's not a huge investment, but practice editing these letters. If you have a lot of small letters, practice them. Use that small letter stitch, right? And, do a couple of test stitches. I know sometimes you guys get really busy and buried, but if you start stitching, then you can start looking at those adjustments maybe you need to make. Maybe you need to open up the E's a little bit more. Maybe you opened them up too much, but practice this, play with this, and, take 10, 15 minutes to stitch something out and see what it looks like. Look at it and see if you like it. See if you can read the names. See if you can read the letters. So, hold on. Debbie's is asking about, I'm not sure if you make your stitch width wider, would it take care of your problems with the small letters? Is that what you're asking? Oh, okay. On yours, okay. If you make the stitch width smaller, what you run into then is, I mean, you could make the stitch width smaller, but you still have to make sure you have 1 millimeter, minimum of 1 millimeter. So making that smaller means you're also going to do a lot of that angle editing to stretch that stitching out so that you have enough thread, to stitch correctly. So, you can try it. I mean, it kind of depends on what your customer is demanding, I guess. If that's the option that you have to use. In most cases, you're better off reshaping the hole in the letter. And I know it sounds stupid, but it looks different on your screen than what it will stitch on your garment. Like that E being higher than the R, unless it was extreme, because of the curving at the top, you're probably not even going to notice the difference in the height. So, you could do it either way. You just would have to angle your stitches more. So does that make more sense, Deb? And I'm sorry, I did misunderstand. I thought you meant like making it wider. All right, so now practice your letters because you will probably have about a bazillion questions after you do this versus just watching the video. Oh, Beverly's asking me about the trim. And this is what I want to do too. Thank you for reminding me, Beverly. Let me show you something real quick. When you are doing small lettering, or any lettering sometimes, usually it does automatically put your trims in, right? Like here's big lettering. Let me go ahead and generate. And see the little scissors between each one, but then I get to the R and the N, and the program says, oh, hey, that's pretty close, so I don't think I'm going to trim. Well, if you want a trim there, then come down to your scissors and click on the scissors. Now I've got a trim there, right? Your machines have trimmers. You can trim between everything. Now, if you have, small lettering, and, the program says, wow, that's really close, and it took out the trims. And that's how most people handle small letters, okay? But you can see there's that little line going from the N up to the top of the I and from the I down to the T, right? Well, if you don't want that there, click on the scissors and your machine will trim. These are close enough. You really probably don't need to put a trim in there. You're not going to see that, right? So that's how you handle those trims, and that's kind of the logic behind why the program doesn't put them in. On your thing, Bev, I think I talked to you that you're probably going to have to get a hold of James and check on some of the machine settings too, because there's a way to set your machine to trim as well. Does that make a little more sense, Bev? All right, so does anybody have any more questions before we kind of end the webinar? Because the small lettering, truly, you're going to have to practice it. And you're going to have to play with it and see, what works. But, if you can find 60 weight polyester thread, it might require a little tension adjustment, but not much. The rayon thread will require a bigger tension adjustment, and it's not bleachable. So, get a hold of Cookie and see if she can hunt down the 60 weight thread if you want to look at that. And like I said, if that's the way you're going to go, I mean, you will get better results with a smaller needle and 60 weight thread on small lettering especially. But, kind of depends on, um, what your customer if you have customers that only use black or white, then great, or a couple of colors, you don't want to have to buy like 700 colors of 60-way thread. And they do come on small cones too, so that you guys do know. So if you want to try it, you could get a small cone and see what it looks like. Debbie's asked me if there's a way to border letters, and the answer is yes. So I'll do that one real quick because it's the same way that you would border anything. So let me put this back in at 25.4. And here's my letters, right? So I showed you how to shadow them. If I want to border letters, then all I'm going to do is, let me get rid of this little one, is, I'm going to select these letters. So I would just come over to the blue color chip and select them so they're all flashing. There's a couple of ways to make a border. If I go to my property settings, then I can just use the border, okay? And, I can go in and edit and say, what kind of border do I want? All borders, because I need inside as well. And my border width, we'll go ahead and make this bigger at 2. And there's my border, right? Satin border instantly. You can't really see because of the color, but, there's my border. It's the same color, right? So if you want to make a different color border, let me go in and turn that border off. And I'm going to beef up these letters a little bit, because they're kind of narrow. They're Arial. It's kind of a standard thing, but let's go with Arial bold. And, okay, I have a little more meat to my letters now, which is normally what you're going to do. Okay, so if I want to, put a border around these letters, and like you can see, Bev, there's like a trim issue there. And let me get rid of this one now so I can pick that out. I would just put the scissors on. Why the program does that is it's logically saying, well, it's not that most of the time you don't trim there, but, I'm going to right click and select everything. And I can do borders another way. I can come up to accessories, or I'm sorry, stitch, and create an outline from area edges. And I can do this with anything, not just letters. And I can say, okay, I want to create a satin border. I don't just want the outside, I want the, inside border too, right? Because I need to make sure these holes have a border, right? And let's make this width 2.0. Now, if I leave it at 2.0, it's going to make it, 1 millimeter out and 1 millimeter in, because it's going to center it on this outline. So if I'm making this 2.0, I might, depending on, how wide these letters are, I might want to change my offset so that it's a little bit further out so that this letter doesn't get covered up. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to leave it at 0. So let's go ahead and I'll make this yellow, and I must have just picked inside borders. Hold on, let me go back there. Stitch, create outline from area edges. I want all borders, and I'll make this 2.0. So it's a 2 millimeter wide satin stitch, and I'm going to leave that offset at 0. Let me change the color real quick. And you can see, that one didn't do too bad, but, it's kind of closing up in the R and the N here, and the E is a little tight too. The B looks pretty good, but, these are, a little jammed up. So I might want to do that a different way. First, I'm going to probably want to edit a little bit on the letters, but, and I'll show you what I would do. But I would select this and say stitch, create an outline from area edges. And if I'm going to use a satin border that's 2 millimeters, I'm going to move this away from the letter a little bit. And I'm going to make the offset like it's 1 millimeter inside, 1 millimeter outside of the letter, because it's 2, right? It balances on that line. So I might say, let's move this out about 0.5 millimeter away. So that's 0.5, right? And that's going to let my letter open up a little bit more. Okay, now I'm going to run into a little bit of a problem, so I would need to space these. But my I would be the one that drove me crazy. And I forgot to do inside borders so that you know. But this I is what I want to show you. When you have something like that, you're going to want to ungroup your letters. You're going to come up to this I. You're going to ungroup that I. And then you're going to left click and select both pieces. And it just kind of, groups these together so I can move that I up so I have a little more, or the dot of the I up so I have a little more space there. All right, so does that make a little more sense on how to quickly make outlines? So now remember to do inside borders or all borders. I'm sorry, I'll tell you the truth. I almost always forget because I'm always in a big hurry. And then I say, oh, duh, I have to go do all borders, right? But, that'll give you an idea. Now, the only thing you have to worry about is, moving that I. You don't want it to be like jam-packed on top of there. So to do that, just ungroup and then just come back here and group those letters. So they're going to stay together. You'll lose your kerning options, but at that point, you probably don't care if you kern. So. All right, so we're going to go ahead and end the webinar, and I have to process the video and then kind of upload it. So as soon as I can, I'll get that link out to you so you can download this one. But practice, torturing your letters a little and, deforming those small letters and do some test stitching so you see the results. So you guys all have a good evening. And you're welcome, Jackie. And watch for your newsletters and, watch for the links to the videos. And I'll try to get the date out to you as quick as I can for the November webinar. We have, kind of a lot of things going on. So, as soon as I can get those out, I will. Norma's asking how you download the webinar. What you're going to get is a link, and it's going to let you download the video. And this one's probably going to be about 60 megabytes. They're pretty decent size, but at least you kind of get to see the whole video. And not yet, Bev. I kind of got buried, but I will get that link to you for what you needed today as soon as possible. So I'm sorry. It just was kind of one of those crazy days. All right, everybody. You have a good evening.